All right, today is April 19th, 2017. Today we have a very special guest, my friend Jesús Mendoza, who is an AmeriCorps volunteer. Jesus, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you doing? Great to be here.
Can you share with us what you do?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm an AmeriCorps volunteer, stationed at a nonprofit that focuses on providing low-cost or free services to low-income communities. I'm focused mostly or primarily in adult education, teaching classes in GED. That's a GED high school equivalency exam preparation. I teach those prep courses. I also teach ESL courses, English as a second language classes throughout the week. Those are my two main courses that I teach at this local adult education center. I also provide some citizenship preparation classes. Any residents, permanent residents who want to get their citizenship, there's to become citizens. We have a class also to help them prepare with the questions and for the interview. And I additionally also teach a Spanish GED course because there's quite a few Latino immigrants that want to actually present their GED exam in Spanish, and that's completely possible. They're both acceptable, English or Spanish. So a bit all over the place, but I guess if you had to just nail it down, it's adult education in a nutshell.
Now, were those particular classes things you wanted to teach growing up?
To be fair, no. Growing up, I was mainly interested in the medical field, but throughout college, I kind of had a change of heart, and I became more interested in English and literature, and actually declared that as my major in college, English. And through the end of college, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I knew I enjoyed English and literature and reading literature, but I didn't quite know what to do. And I thought about education because actually my mother is an elementary school teacher, and I had always had education kind of in the back of my mind. But I didn't want to fully commit to sort of a teacher credential program without having at least gotten my feet wet in the area. So I looked for some volunteer opportunities shortly after graduating from college last May. And I found this opportunity in Austin, near Austin, Texas, and I thought it sounded like an interesting sort of experience, and it wasn't too long of a commitment, just 11 months. Well, I say just, but I mean, relatively to a full-time or more contractual sort of position. I had the flexibility of only having 11 months to sort of get a feel for the education field and see if it's something I could potentially pursue in the future or not. So it's education has been sort of a recent interest of mine, but it's been, I think, a good experience to have this sort of exposure in a nonprofit setting without the full-time commitment of a teacher position, for example, like a public school. So it's been a recent interest of mine.
Right, and I think people find late found passions all the time, and it's really fine to do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny how we're just fed this mentality that if you don't discover your interest or you feel that you have passion by the time that you enter college, or certainly not by the time you leave college, that you're kind of lost and just ambling around with your life. But I mean, I think that it's all right as you progress throughout your life, your 20s, 30s, 40s. Heck, I've heard of people do career changes in their 50s to do something completely different. I think it's acceptable. Yeah, no, it's definitely not. I want to think that I'm young, right? I'm only 22 years old, so I think it can be a little uncomfortable to not know exactly what you want to do, especially when you see others in your similar situation already seeming to have started their own career paths or be more committed to a certain career path. But it can be a rewarding experience, and it can be one that leads you to discover sort of interests that you may have not previously considered, and find something that actually piques your interest.
Could you talk to us a little bit about the organization that is AmeriCorps?
Yeah, so AmeriCorps, it's a national, actually governmental organization that I believe is in all 50 states in the United States. They take volunteers from the ages of, sure, 18 to, I don't know, there's no age limit really. Um, they team up with local nonprofits all throughout 50 states, and they create these opportunities in very diverse fields, anything from, like in my case, adult education, but there are also other AmeriCorps positions that focus on disaster relief, other ones on environmental preservation, other ones in public health, others in more primary education. They're all over the place. So this AmeriCorps uh, organization looks for volunteers to commit to either 1 or 2 year position and to just help out the community. Really, you're a volunteer and you are paid as well. It's a very slim stipend that they offer you, but you can't live off of it. So that's one thing I would advise. Just if you are interested in AmeriCorps, just be aware of the financial restrictions and the I mean, to be honest, a bit of hardship unless you have financial backing, or if you have saved up for this, or if you are still dependent. In my case, I'm still dependent on my parents, so I have, I guess, the freedom of not depending completely 100% on the stipend that they offer through AmeriCorps. So I would keep that in mind. But it is a volunteer position. I think you do this mostly for the experience, and I guess just the satisfaction that you're helping out some local nonprofit, and trying to create some sort of change or foster some improvement in the community in whichever field that you choose, for either 1 or 2 year period of time.
And who are your peers? Are they also teachers like yourself?
Well, within my AmeriCorps cohort, it's a bit strange. So I'm the only AmeriCorps volunteer at my site. My site, as I said, it's a nonprofit, and they employ mostly the teachers themselves are mostly part-time positions. These are folks who have day jobs or have other positions to supplement their part-time positions as a teacher, as either a GED instructor or as an ESL instructor. They're mostly, like I said, well into their own careers as teachers, as educators. I'd say the youngest one that I've seen is about a 30-something, 32 years old. And the rest are more late 30s, 40s and such. But that's just at my site. And then within my AmeriCorps cohort, I would say most of my peers are run the span of 20-something, the 20-something range. You have individuals who are like me who just recently graduated from college. You have others who are more further along in their 20s, but you also have people in their a few people that are in their 30s and 40s. I believe I even have one woman who's in her 50s, and like I said, she's for some reason or another she chose to commit to this volunteer position for 11 months. So I would say it's mostly for people in their 20s, but there's no age limit. There is no one strict sort of person or age group that corresponds to this AmeriCorps job or this AmeriCorps position.
So you mentioned that there can be a couple older folks out there who are volunteering at AmeriCorps. Would you say that the position is sustainable and you can do it for a long period of time?
I would say no, just because, like I mentioned, that the stipend is really just meant for to get by. It's not something that I would want others to take as a renewable source of income for an extended period of time. I think they deliberately structure this in a way that, it's just 1 or 2 years that you are committing to the service, and only 1 or 2 years that you'll have to live off of this stipend, unless, of course, like I said, you are financially backed by some other parents, such as in my case. But it's not. I wouldn't really call this a renewable sort of a renewable position, at least not as a volunteer. I do know that there are potential ways of actually getting hired through the nonprofits that you work with, but that's not a guaranteed position. It's just if a position opens up, and if they like your work, and if you like the work, most importantly, then you can commit to a more full-time position through the nonprofit, and then sort of veering away from the AmeriCorps stipend.
Jesus, I wanted to ask you a question on the difficulties with gauging which occupation to pursue coming out of college. You mentioned that you had a change of heart and you got interested in education. Did you have any experiences teaching in college or high school that made you think, it's something that I can consider down the line after graduation? Maybe I can tutor in college to get more experience?
Yeah, so I believe it was my sophomore year in college that I did. It was a short stint, but I did volunteer for one semester, no, 2 semesters, 2 semesters as an ESL English instructor. It was at a local community center. It was only uh, one evening a week that I would commit to this for 3 or 4 hours. And at the time, I just saw it as a sort of as just a volunteer position, something uh, that I was interested mostly because of the population I was working with. It was a community center servicing predominantly Latino immigrants in the community near my university. So it's a community that, I mean, close to my experiences as growing up as a Latino immigrant. So that's why I was attracted to that position. And the teaching, it was honestly not at that point something that I was regarding as a sort of the initiation into my career. At that point, I was still focused on entering the medical field. So at that point, I just saw it as something that I just did I don't know, as a extracurricular activity that I could potentially in the future use as something to speak about. But definitely something. It was looking back now my initial experience in college and teaching.
And to my understanding, you were also involved with an excellent organization called Camp Sweeney. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that influenced your career?
Yeah, so Camp Sweeney, it's a really just amazing sort of organization. It's a residential summer camp for children and teenagers with type 1 diabetes. It's about an hour north of Dallas, Texas. I worked there for one summer after my sophomore year, so in between my sophomore and junior years, I worked there as a counselor. The title says counselor, but that really just encompasses so many things. But primarily, I lived alongside and cared for, and really just was just there for support for these kids who have type 1 diabetes. And it was a very challenging experience, to be honest. It was almost a 24/7 on constant basis of you having to pretty much submit your needs and push them aside for the needs of these campers that you were taking care of and that you were caring for and that you were being um, a mentor to in a certain way. I was in a cabin with the youngest campers, so it's just about anywhere from 15 to 30, 4 to 11-year-olds. So you can imagine the sort of chaos and havoc that could break out in this cabin at any moment in time. And like I said, just given my demeanor, I'm more of a reserved, more introverted sort of personality. So it definitely took me. It was quite challenging for me to try to be so expressive and so just engaged and outspoken and sort of loud in one sense with these campers. And um, I mean, at the time, I get struggle with the position, and it was a very challenging position. But now I look back at it and I regard it with certain fondness because I think it proved to me that the fact that if I were to commit to education, it would just have to veer away from probably an elementary level. Just working with children that young, it's probably not something that I would um, be interested in. If I were to teach, I would want to teach definitely a much older group of people, potentially, I don't know, high schoolers, but middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, it's a bit much at least for my personality to handle. So that was definitely like something that I really appreciated having gained from my experience at Camp Sweeney.
It sounds like that reality check experience is what kind of formed you and helped you decide what kind of people to teach, what kind of organizations to attach yourself to. Are there any easy to obtain part time jobs or experiences that you would recommend future volunteers to try out before committing themselves full time to such an endeavor?
To which endeavor, the Camp Sweeney or to the AmeriCorps position?
To either one.
Well, I think to the Camp Sweeney, it's just, I would say, yeah, just be knowledgeable of how you react with, I guess, kids. Just if you haven't had any previous experience working with kids, then I would find a way to, I don't know, potentially volunteer at a daycare center or something that doesn't require you to be on site 24/7. Because as I said, if you think you're okay with kids for like short bursts of time, that's different than being with the kids on a near 24/7 basis. So if you could have some experience working with kids before wanting to be a camp counselor, I would definitely suggest that. And as far as my current position as an English and GED instructor, I would say uh, I want to say that there are definitely opportunities to work with a local nonprofit as an ESL instructor or as a GED instructor, just because these positions usually just require you to have, you don't have to have prior teaching experience, but it definitely helps. It looks good. But it is a part-time position, so I think it would be a good way for you to tap into this adult education realm without committing yourself to a very lengthy, more committed position as a public school teacher, for example.
Jesus, I want to talk to you about your interview experience. What was the interview experience like?
Well, I submitted first, so this is I think, July of last year. I submitted my online application, and within a few days, very quick response. I got an email just from the director asking me to set up a phone interview. So at the time I was living in San Diego, and I was just going to receive a phone call from the director who was in Austin to interview me. The interview process was fairly pain free. It was just about a half-hour phone call that I had with the director of the AmeriCorps program, and it was, I think, just your typical questions, nothing too rigorous. If you're not comfortable with phone conversations, I would say that maybe that would be an issue. But for me, the phone wasn't too much of an issue. They wanted mostly the position itself didn't require any previous experience in education, but most of the questions I think were centered on any previous teaching experience that you had, just because they wanted you to wanted to see how would you react in this sort of environment. They also asked questions, I think, about how time management skills. How would you deal with coordinating a busy schedule? Like, what are your strategies that you have? And also another question was how do you deal with new and challenging situations, and how do you adapt? What's your adaptation process like? So I think they wanted to just get a feel of what people how they react to just being dropped into this nonprofit setting and potentially moving to a new city, as I did to Austin, just to see how they react to the program itself. But it was a fairly good experience with the interview. Nothing too stressful.
Would you say that the talking points were guided by your previous experiences, or were they more hypothetical situations that you thought of?
I'd say it was mostly based on my previous situations. I definitely talked about my experience at Camp Sweeney. I definitely talked about a bit about my experience as a volunteer teacher during my sophomore year in college. So it helped me to have had those experiences in the past to talk about them, because most of these questions that were asked that I received were example questions that were asking you to provide real life experiences that you had in order to answer the questions. So it definitely helps to have had the experience in the past.
Could you give me a rundown of your day-to-day schedule?
Sure. So usually it's about an 8-hour workday that I have. I teach anywhere from 2 to 4 hours per day, I would say. I'll teach and tutor. I mostly teach, but I'll do some tutoring on the side as well as needed if any students require more or want any more individual attention. Mondays I'd have more of a morning to evening schedule, and then Tuesday through Thursdays I have a more afternoon to night schedule, but roughly 8 hours a day. Uh, yeah, like I said, 2 to 4 hours of teaching, and then those other 4 hours are real preparation hours, just for you to prepare classroom materials, any lesson plans that you'd like to have ready for the next days or weeks, if you want to plan that far in advance. So I'd say it's a pretty even split between teaching / tutoring and then planning time. Anywhere, yeah, at least 8 hours. The way AmeriCorps is structured, it's not too strict a 9 to 5 sort of job. You have an hour count that you have to fulfill within your 11-month span of service. So as long as you have a consistent work day, at least 8 hours a day that you're working, in order to meet this hour count by the end of your 11-month term, you're good to go. So it's pretty flexible, to be honest. Yeah.
Would you say that the work is collaborative? Do you often collaborate with your peers?
For some classes, yes, and some other classes, no. For the GED class, for example, I do co-teach with another part-time teacher. She's an elementary school teacher, but she works at the nonprofit in the evenings as a GED instructor. So I work alongside her. So we collaborate with that. But the rest of the time, I would say it was mostly individually directed work that I just that I create on my own, in my lesson plans that I create on my own, and then that I teach also on my own. There are saying that there are the teachers on there at the site that can definitely provide guidance or any help, but to take more of a hands-off approach and just let me do what I want, unless I have any real difficulties or questions that I can ask them. Then they're more than willing to help and guide me as needed.
Teaching is a critical part of your role. Can you talk to us about how you tend to prepare for classes at AmeriCorps?
Yeah, so it really depends on the subject in terms of how I plan. For the GED classes, these are high school subjects that I'm teaching. These are English, reading and writing, math, up to about algebra, and science and social studies. So these subjects that I do take more of a, perhaps what you could call I guess a lecture style sort of style of teaching, that I read prep books that are provided by myriad of publishers that offer these GED prep books. But I read those over and then sort of try to create my own presentation or my own interpretation of the material we presented in these preparation books, and then I sort of try to present it to the class as a whole, focusing mostly on English and math, because English and math do seem to be are definitely the most difficult subject for most people. So I focus on that, and then the rest of the class time, it's more of an individual work, just seeing where students are, which of the 4 subjects they need the most work with, and then providing preparation or providing materials for them to work on their on an individual basis, and then I would serve mostly in a tutor function. So that's sort of the teaching style that I take for the GED classes. As far as the ESL classes, that's English, so that's quite different. That's mostly, or only, only English. So really trying to see what level they're at. I mean, there's all the way from beginner levels where these individuals have 0 to very, very, very limited English skills, all the way up to more of an advanced class where they're approaching sort of an English, sort of a high school level of English. So it really depends on what level ESL you're teaching. Me, I focus mostly on intermediate, so that's sort of reaching conversational, getting more comfortable with reading and writing. So I try to incorporate the 4 main areas, I guess, of communication: reading, writing, listening, and speaking in every class that I teach. And then one really heavy emphasis that I like to incorporate, or that they really push for with these adult ESL classes, is just applying and finding real world examples. So I guess we're not reading so much, I guess, fiction, or we're not reading poetry in these ESL classes. We're reading grocery ads, we're reading prescription labels, we're reading know your rights as an immigrant sort of um, pamphlets that are distributed throughout the community that all are practicing their English, but they're all very applicable and easy for the students to see how they can apply these skills in their day-to-day lives, because that's one really important component about adult education is that they want to see how they want to easily see how what they're learning in the classroom can apply to the real day-to-day lives, because these are people that are working full-time jobs. They have families that they have to sustain. So, I mean, these classes they're important, but in some cases they're not exactly their priority, or it's not their entire life, where as it would be for a child or kid, in middle school. I mean, where school is just their only thing, or that is their job. School is their job. For these students, there's adult learners. They take the classes because they can, because they want to learn, but they do want to see how it applies to their lives, because otherwise they get frustrated and just don't see, I guess, how it's really useful for them. So coming back to English, yes, I always try to practice reading, writing, speaking, and listening, but always try to emphasize how they can use that in their day-to-day interactions at home or in the community, wherever they may need it to be, or participant in our, I guess, English-speaking society. So preparing for my teaching day, it depends on the subject.
Jesus, teaching is a really difficult thing, as I'm sure you realize. Would you say that there are some fantasies about teaching that you want to dispel?
Fantasies, misconceptions, I guess you could say. I would say that um, it is a lot. I guess the typical image is you always being in the classroom and you always being engaged with students. Don't get me wrong, there is definitely that interaction between teacher and student, but honestly, it is quite a bit of preparation that you have to work with, and that can be definitely slower and more dull versus teaching in the classroom and actually engaging with your students. So I think to dispel, yes, one conception that I had is that it's mostly teaching. Yes, it is teaching, being in the classroom, being there with the students, but it is also a lot of preparation, a lot of lesson planning, looking over materials and trying to compile information and think of a way to present it to your students in the best fashion and in just the most meaningful way for them to understand it. So that's one thing I would say. That's one real big issue, or misconception perhaps, that there is a lot of planning involved in teaching. And I would also say that I guess in my position as an adult educator, there is no grading involved. There is no real testing. I mean, these classes they're not typical like credit bearing courses. These aren't college courses. These aren't high school courses where they're building towards, or where they're getting grades or such. So, just to keep that in mind as well. As a teacher, you're also faced with a lot of grading, a lot of scoring, papers that can also take quite a bit of time, from outside of being in the classroom.
And you mentioned that this experience has kind of influenced you to maybe pursue education after you've completed your 1 to 2 year term at AmeriCorps. What do you think of your future going ahead?
Well, I think that I have definitely like seen that teaching is something that I would want to do. But yeah, I think at this point I could say with a little more confidence than before I started my term that I do think teaching is something I could do in the future. But I think I would want it. I think I touched upon this earlier. So probably not with a real young population. Probably not elementary school. Definitely not middle school. So if I were to teach, I think I would want to teach at a higher level of so either high school or I am considering trying to reach grad school so that I could potentially maybe, and this is a real big maybe, just teach at a college level and be a professor at a college. But that's a very big question mark, just because first I have to get into either a master's or a master's program, and then gain teaching experience at that level, and then hope for the best and maybe get a position teaching at a university or at a college. But I do think that if I do end up teaching, I'd want to teach at least at a high school level.
And Jesus, this is a conversation we can be having in private extensively later. after this interview, but how do you feel about living in Arizona?
In Arizona,
Yes.
how do I feel about living in Arizona? It is, yeah. Well, I would be interested. I do feel that it's part of the Southwest, so not too far from my home state of California, from my home city of San Diego. I hear it's quite hot there in the summer, but I do think it could be a good experience. I've been to Phoenix only once, I believe, and I've been through Tucson, and Tucson seems like a nice area. So I would say that I would be open to the idea.
And the reason why I mentioned that is because my high school is hiring a high school teacher in social studies, so I might be able to connect you to my former teacher.
Oh, no, that would be quite nice of you. Yeah.
Sounds good. Jesus, we really appreciate you for joining us. We're going to end with a final note from you about people who might be interested in AmeriCorps and volunteering in general. What kind of final message do you want to tell them?
Yeah, I would say that just be flexible, keep an open mind with sort of work you want to do. If you are vaguely interested in some sort of field, as I mentioned, be it public health, be it disaster relief, immigration services, or adult education, it is a good way of sort of getting your feet wet in an area as a volunteer, as a without a full length or more long term commitment. So I think it's good for people who are just beginning to generate some interest in a field in order to see if they are indeed interested in and willing to pursue that as a more long term career. So I would say, yeah, for immediate college graduates or recent college graduates, it would be a very appealing choice. Um, just again being aware of the realities of the sort of stipend and sort of living standards that you have to be faced with the stipend that they offer you. But I think it is definitely an excellent choice for people who are flexible and willing to enter like a nonprofit environment to explore some field that they have some interest in, but that they don't want to commit to on a more long-term basis.
And lastly, very quickly, do you want to recommend any formal and informal recruiting channels to tap into to procure a job at AmeriCorps or a volunteering organization in general?
I mean, if you're at university, potentially your university has a list of resources. I know my university did have definitely a online list of. It was called the Center for Social Concerns at my university. Perhaps you have something similar at your university that just compiles information about volunteer opportunities, not just through AmeriCorps. For AmeriCorps specifically, the way I found this position was honestly just Googling AmeriCorps and then logging into their search function and just seeing what positions are available throughout their states. I think they do a good job dividing up their positions by location and then also through field through interest field. So I think those are the two best resources I would offer.
That was Jesús Mendoza, everyone. Thank you, Jesus. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, DH.